Hello there. I hope that everybody is doing well tonight. I am Kat Hobson, your host, and you are listening to Fate Mag Radio, the online voice of Fate Magazine. I am really fortunate tonight because A, it's a great day, and B, I have someone that I really enjoy um, and admire. His work is fantastic, and that is my friend Michael Koff. He is the host of The Energy That Surrounds Us. He also is just on everything, involved in everything. He is part of Jim Mallard's Duck Pond, and he's really taken those lessons to heart. He's a brilliant researcher, he's a great investigator. And Michael Kuff, thank you for being here.
Well, thank you for having me.
Well, it has been a crazy day. My energy has just been everywhere. And Carl and I were talking before the show that there was a mass shooting here in Birmingham, and last night or this morning, I think it was last night. And so everything has just been nuts. And it could not have been far from me because I live in the city limits. Hey, Lori Dorsey. But so my energy is just a little wonk. And as I was getting ready, technology, as you know, does respond to energy a lot of times. And
Oh, yeah.
like 5 different times, we lost my mic feed, things happened. So if I have technical difficulties, I will be right back with you. So I am so glad that you are here because, you know, I admire your work a lot.
Well,
And
I admire yours as well.
thank you. But you have really gone from um, being new and not really unsure because you're never unsure. And I like that about you. But you have just really built your network of listeners and friends, and it's fun to watch. Why did you initially begin doing your podcasting?
Well, that's actually a funny story is when I was coming off an investigation, a network approached me and said, "We think you'd be a great podcast host. What do you think?" And I looked at him and I said, "I've only been doing this like 3, 4 months. I don't know anybody in the field. I don't think I'd be a good host at all. I don't know what's going on, anything." And they were like, "No, you'd be great. And they're like, "But it's up to you." And so I was like, "Well, I'm gonna have to say no because I just don't feel ready." And then,
Right?
as the universe works its miracles, about 2, 3 years later, I'm at a paranormal para unity event a friend was hosting, and he's there, and he goes live with his network, and I didn't realize what was going on, and he pulls me aside and goes, "Hey, would you like to say hi to everyone?" And so I go, and so I'm looking at a telephone and I'm going, "Hi," and somebody approaches me, so I had to walk away. And when I came back, they were putting everything up. I said, "Oh, I didn't get my 15 seconds of fame." And he laughs and he goes, "Oh no, we're not done with you yet.
Yeah.
So have you thought any more about the podcasting idea?" And I looked at him and I said, "You know what? I think it's time."
And the rest
It,
is not history because you had learning to do. And, we met because of somebody that's a really good mentor.
yes, he is.
And he's a great one for bringing you along with him.
Oh, I know. And he is supportive. And I love his one golden rule. And that is, if you're authentic with me, then we're great.
Yeah.
That's like number one. He's like, "Just be yourself with me. That's it." And that was one of the best lessons I could ever learn, because It's helped me to meet people and be like, wow, even though I'm standing in front of somebody who may be like a huge television star, I don't sit
Yeah.
be like, "Oh my god, this or this." He helped me to just approach him like anybody else, and when we're off on our own, then I'm all like, "Oh my god, I can't," "I've watched you on this, and I can't believe this," and then I'm like, "Okay, I'm pulling it back in."
Yeah. Well, it is sometimes a little overwhelming because when you're at an event with someone like that, it's especially when other people are fangirling or around you and you're trying to have a conversation, right? Sometimes and still, because I do a lot of UFO events with a lot of ancient alien guys and stuff like that, and I'm still kind of like, okay, this is still my friend. Okay, this isn't a star. They are a star, but you know you do have to keep your focus on where you want that relationship, because I feel like the minute that you start fangirling or fanboying or whatever, that relationship is tainted, and you've lost the professionalism that they expect you to have around them, and you've lost the friendship vibe too, because
Right,
you just become a fan and not a friend.
right, and a lot of them are surrounded by people who are just, like, for the autograph or just for the photo to
Yes,
say,
just
"Look
the
at who I
photo.
was with," and I I have to say too, what I love about podcasting is I just had 2, like, I would call, like, ultra high in the
Yeah,
field people on one of my shows, and both of them were like, "Look, just at the end of the day, we're all normal people. I'm no better than you are. We're all on the same level."
yeah,
So, because I always like to be honest with my guests before coming on, going, yeah, if I'm like a super fan, I'm like, I'll tell them behind the scenes and be like, yeah, I'm getting this out of my system. And they're like, well, good. I'm glad you're getting it out now. And
yeah,
then at the end of the episodes, they're always like, that was such a great episode. But it's because we kept it at a common ground. And I think part of that too is, and traveling with my friend, our friend,
yeah,
he never uses fame. Like the only time I ever used him use his fame was we were trying to promote something and we were in a town and we're sitting there going, we're in the newspaper office and there's only two people in there and we're like, oh, we'd like to learn the history of this or, some of this. And they're like, well, we don't really have that person here. Or
right.
it was like we could see it going downhill. And we're like, well, who's your celebrity person to report on celebrities? They're like, any of us can do that. We're like, well, here, watch this video. And we put a video of his up and we like walked out of that building and we were like, wow, because they were like, oh, it's really cool that you did that and everything, but yeah, we're not going to do a story. And it was
Still
like,
can't help
really?
you.
It's like we could have opened so many doors, and it's like it was nice to learn to go. You can use it for good, but then you also have to know when to walk away and be like, not be like the diva type of celebrity going, oh my god, we're totally gonna bash you because you did this. It was like, no, we just walked away and just was like, okay, whatever, your loss.
Well, the fun thing is that I, you know, Fate magazine is famous. I'm not famous. And it's really fun to take copies places and just say, I just wanted to leave these for you. And it's like, the edition that my story was in, and then our friend Tony Rathman has the, the story in the brand new one, which by the way is the Skimwalker, and it is fantastic. That cover is one of the best covers we've ever done. And it's just go to fatemag.com and check it out. You can also subscribe. You can read it there. You can read some of the articles there, but check the artwork out because I have nothing to do with that. And I think it is absolutely beyond amazing. So, but a lot of times I get access because of the magazine. And then when people realize that I've been doing Paranormal Experienced for 10 years, they're like, oh, well, okay. And that's kind of fun. But, there's somebody that I've always wanted to interview, and he's not really elusive. He's not standoffish. But every time I'm like, yeah, I'd really like to schedule something. And he's like, well, you'll just have to keep asking me because, I don't have my book with me or whatever. And finally, we recently were at an event together and I just said, I'm absolutely not going to ask anymore. And it's not a lack of respect. It's not frustration, but I don't want you to feel pressured every time you see me.
Right.
We haven't seen each other for 3 years and I didn't mention one time coming on with me. COVID and their health and stuff like that. And so it was interesting because they didn't know what to say. And I just said, I don't chase interviews. I'm just glad to see you. And I don't want you to run when you see me, because it can evolve into that if you're that person,
Right.
And I'm just like, no, I'm not going to ask you for an interview. I'm just going to say, hey, how you doing? It's so good to see you. It works. I don't want them running.
Yeah, but I gotta admit, Kat, you are a celebrity.
Probably not. I talk to celebrities sometimes. So you're here.
I
But,
know.
but
I
thank you for
feel like we're
saying
both celebrities now.
that. It's really something because I'm very, I love Paranormal Experienced. It's my first show. I did it for 5 years before I got Fate magazine, and I'm never bored. And I've never once, had a guest on that I was like, oh, wish I hadn't done that. I mean, there have been people that it was like pulling teeth sometimes.
I've
And
had a few of those.
I had somebody actually do her manicure while we were on the air. And you could hear her filing, and she was giving me one word answers. And I had a producer at the time. And so when we finished, my producer said, I did not know that you had your degree in dentistry. I said, I don't. That's why it took so long to get this out. But different people, if they're not in the mood that day, sometimes it can be hard. Have you ever
Right.
had an
And
interview like that?
I have. I had an interview once that I was like sitting there and I would ask a question, they'd go, yes. And I'm like, okay. Well, let me get another question in my mind really quick because gotta think fast. And it's like, oh man,
I do.
'cause we're used to interviews where people give us like a few sentences to a paragraph to like 15-minute answers, and you're like,
Mhm.
oh my gosh, I got so many questions out of this. This is great.
Yeah.
And when you get one word, you're sitting there and you have the deer in headlights look because you're like, I don't know where to go from here. There's
That's
like, you
the
can't
exact
get a
look.
facial clue to going, do I go further? Do I abandon this topic? What do I do? Because that's the thing about podcast hosting is people don't realize we use facial clues and what's said for a lot of the material. And
Mhm.
I gotta admit too, I like doing video because I can see when my
Yes.
answers have hit their marks, and it's like, and I don't start rambling because when it's video, I don't know. I don't have that visual stop.
Audio when it's on. Yes, I agree.
So,
And I just recently started doing video, and because I was a little intimidated by it, right? And then now I don't even know why. I love it. It's so much
yeah,
fun. I feel like, we're sitting in a room together having a conversation, and it's just it's entirely a different conversation because if some you know if somebody doesn't want to talk about something, you can go, oh, okay, that's a no. Yeah,
right.
that
But,
look, just shut that down.
right. But there is also, it's like kind of like a double edged sword because as frustrating as it is, you get to connect more because people aren't looking at you and going, oh, and being distracted by what's going on screen. They're just
Hmm.
purely listening and getting caught up in the story. So
Yeah.
to me, I also enjoy doing audio only because it gets people's attention and you grab them with the story or you don't. And it's like, you can't fault it. It's pure just by hearing if you can get their attention or not. And I had a friend who runs a network and he does a radio station through his network.
Hmm.
And he was like, we need to get you on the radio. And I'm like, I don't want to do radio because I want people to see what's going on. I want them to see. And he goes, no, see, this is what the purpose of the radio. When you're talking and you go, well, and I had this device and it's, like this or this, and this is how I use it. They're going to hear that on the radio and go, what device?
Yes.
What are they, what is it doing? They're going to go and watch the episode on video to see what you were talking about. And I was like, I'd never thought about that to use audio to get attention to build your numbers on video.
Well,
I was,
it's logical.
yeah,
And I like just audio too, because I feel like I have friends that Tom McNicholas is a nut. He said I was always told he had a face for radio. He is not just a face for radio. But it I like that sometimes people get drawn into a story that that's being told just audibly. They're vested because they're having to focus more. And I also have people who do not want to do video, guests that I've had over the years and would love to have back on. And they're like, I'm not doing a video. And I'm like, you're very attractive and you've got a great story and you've got all this stuff. You would be great on video. You're great audibly. What bothers you? Just don't want to do video. And I'm like, are you in the witness protection or, you know, you're on television. You can't be
yeah.
bashful.
That's
And
funny when they're on television. Your thoughts are you and Witsack. It's
yeah,
like, well, they're kind of blow their cover if they're on TV.
it was funny, but it was just so unexpected. And they're a brilliant researcher, and they're probably they're actually the best researcher I know. And I was taken aback because I was like, this would be so great. Nope, not doing video.
So
And you have to respect
actually,
that.
yeah, and one way I got around that, cat, is because I had a guest recently on my series who was like, I don't feel comfortable doing video. And I said, that's fine. You know, we can, it's audio and, you know, it is filmed, but, I'll figure out how to do just audio if
Hmm.
that's what you want to do. And the guest thought about it and they go, well, can I put my avatar picture up or leave the
Yes.
video off? And I was like, that's fine if that's what you want to do. So the whole episode is me talking to the little circle because and it would light up when they were talking, and I was like, it to me it was the same. I mean, it was challenging because I couldn't see her facial expression or his expression, but at the same time, they're able to do the audio they're comfortable with,
Yes.
and I get the video that I'm comfortable with. And so it's like the best of
Kind
both
of
worlds.
comfortable.
So that's something you might, in the future, if that comes up, go, hey, we can do a video and use an avatar photo or
That's
use
a
a
great
picture.
idea.
You don't have to have yourself live on screen. And that's
I
something
will
I
do
learned.
that. I will do that because, you know, that's the only person I've come across who adamantly said, absolutely, I'm not doing video. I have no interest in it, don't want to do it. I'm uncomfortable with it. Okay. And it was somebody that I had interviewed, just Audible only a couple of times over the years. So I play those replays when I want, if I'm going to be like having to run a rebroadcast or something. I
Right.
just run that and, on the Facebook streams and stuff. And it works. So,
It is. And it's amazing how things have changed because I was talking with a fellow podcast host and he had interviewed me like I think 2 years ago, and I finally got him on my show. It worked out, and had to pre-record it because he wasn't available
yeah.
during the normal time. So during the pre-record, and then he's like asking me, "Hey, I see all these symbols on the top of your banner. What are you airing to those places?" I said, "Yeah, I air, all of those. Some of them are live, some of them you can catch the replay through." And he goes, well, I see you have Spotify. Do you direct to Spotify? I was like, no, Spotify, as far as I know, doesn't have a platform where you can record direct to it. And he goes, well, but so you're doing audio only there? I said, no, I'm doing video. He goes, Spotify does video
Yeah.
now? I was like, yeah. And so even the networks are going that were audio only are going into video. And I actually stumbled on, and this story is so funny with the network, is I found a company called A Access or Acast. It's Acast.
Yes.
And I was like, I don't know where I saw this from. It's like, I swear it was like recommended to me through a platform. And they were like, yeah, it's easy to air to here. So I set it up and I was like, well, it's audio only. I'm like, well, I got to do audio for the radio station. So it's not that big a deal. I already have the audio file. So I, was just like, yeah, let's do it. And I went back to say to the company where I got the recommendation, yeah, this is really cool. Thanks for the recommendation. Couldn't find it. Couldn't find anywhere anybody saying anything about this. And I was like,
Wow.
I think the universe put me on Acast for something, so I'm gonna roll with it until
Don't question
they
it.
change the rules. And it's like, nope.
That's funny. Don't you love that when the universe does stuff like that?
Oh,
I
I
mean,
know.
you're sitting there and it's like, well, I've got this and I've got that. And, and then recently, because, all the internet problems that I've recently had, right? So, I was just like, what am I going to do? This is crazy. And somebody that I really admire a lot said, this happens to me all the time. Just do it again. I was just
Yeah,
like, when I get in trouble, because I am to have been such a rule breaker back in the day, I'm so not a rule breaker now. And I try to just, yeah, I do right, I do good. I try to never do anything unkind. I never do it intentionally, right? But I was just like, oh my goodness, I can't do, yeah, that might be shady. It's like, do you want to get your show out or do you not? And I was like, maybe a little shady, but not
yeah,
being harmful. So I did that. And now here I am talking to you and huzzah. But I want to talk about your paranormal investigative side. Are you up for that?
sure. No, I always look forward to those conversations.
Why did you start with an interest in the paranormal? What
I
brought you there?
started because there was always a fascination with me. Growing up in the metaphysics, I understood death's not the final, that there's afterlife and, you know, going to different places. But I was like, how cool would it be to actually talk to someone who's going through that or is there and to see what is it like? And so when I went on my first with my first team and doing some of the investigations, I was like, wow, I realized how actually closed off I was to what was going on around me and
Well,
thinking I'm so open. And what I mean by that is, so the example I use is I was at Old Park Hotel in Ballinger, Texas. Great active location, never disappoints. So I'm doing a Facebook Live walking through, and I enter this kids' room and I'm filming, and I turn and I'm about to walk out, and my phone starts going off with Messenger and all this stuff. And so I'm like, I'm doing a live. I'm like, don't answer that. But it keeps going. And so I finally go into the hallway and I'm walking into a room and I say, okay, guys, I got to check my phone. I'll be back. Turn off the live. And what the messages were is people were telling me there was a girl's voice in the room. So I totally missed it.
ah,
Never heard it. And oh, let the squirrels have the dog's attention.
that's okay. Mine were going because their dad got home. It's the
And
price we pay for them. Yeah,
oh yeah, always
worth it.
entertaining. But so, and then people were saying, we heard your name being called while you were in the hallway. Again, never heard. And so I was like, okay, I got to hear this. So I never actually can say I heard my name, but I did back it up to hear a little girl's voice say, leave me alone in this
Oh,
room. So I posted it and was like, wow, thank you guys for pointing this out. I totally missed this. I didn't hear it. Well, then I get a message a few months later, and someone goes, you need to look at your video again because you caught the little girl. Look at this photo. And a friend in Temple, Texas, taught me when you see a shadow image, take a line, and if you can outline a person, you got a spirit.
hmm.
Well, it looked like a little kid crouched in a corner with their knees to their chest and arms
Oh,
around it. And I was like, oh my God. they'll leave me alone. Now I have this. And then a couple years later, I'll go and for some reason I look at the video again. And before the EVP happens, there's 3 taps on my shoulder I'd never heard. And
Really?
I didn't even feel. And I'm like, how is this possible? And so that also gets me interested in the paranormal because I'm like, wait a minute. Here, there's voices coming through
Yes.
equipment that I didn't hear. I'm being touched and didn't know it. What, and I was like, this is too much fun. I gotta stick with this, and this is just
Yeah.
way more entertaining than I thought.
It is, right? I mean, and that's why we get snagged into it. But I want you to elaborate a little bit, if you would. You said growing up with metaphysics. How did you how did you grow up in the knowledge of metaphysics?
So you're gonna love this story. Is
I always love stories from you.
when my parents and I moved to Texas, our family, we were Catholic by my dad's side, Lutheran by my mother's side. So he found a Catholic church, so we were going there. And I would be sitting with my parents, and the second the priest or whoever delivers the sermon in the Catholic Church, it's been so long I don't remember the correct title, but when he would get up and before he'd say his first word, my head would drop and my eyes would be closed. And then when he finished, I would be like lifting my head back up and opening my eyes. And it happened every time we went there. No matter who was up to give the sermon, I would always fall asleep and they couldn't wake me up. It was like I was out.
That's unusual.
And so we decided, because we had freedom of choice of, our beliefs, I was like, you know what? I'm not really feeling this religious dogma deal and I don't understand what they're talking about, probably because I was asleep through it all. And I
That would
was
do it.
like, you know, I don't think so. I don't. This just doesn't fit. And so I went and started studying other religions.
Mhm.
And I would take courses and research like tarot cards or palm reading or different healing modalities. But I always would seek within myself what's going on and had a core belief within myself.
Right.
Like the closest thing would be is like I could say I had an innate sense of chivalry as a kid before
Okay.
understanding
Yeah.
what that even meant. It was like I couldn't, like, if somebody was getting picked on, I'd be like, "Hey, wait a minute, this isn't right." But I then realized in talking with a medium group, I was like, something clicked in my head, and I'm like, you know what? I feel like I deserve answers. And so I said
Okay.
to him, what was the deal with me in church? Why I would always fall asleep during the sermon. And my guides laugh and they go, we didn't want you to get the dogma. So I had no dogma to let go of in learning to advance in spirituality and self growth. And so I feel like it was easier for me, but at the same time, though, I wouldn't say it gives me a leg up on people because I still make mistakes. I'm not perfect.
Well, everybody makes mistakes. That's just
But
part of us.
yeah, and the one thing about metaphysics that I gravitated towards and stuck with is one of the main focuses. when you make a choice in life, you make a choice in that moment. That moment passes, that choice may no longer be good. So instead of dwelling on the fact you made a bad choice, you simply make another choice. And so whenever the choice no longer fits, you just make another choice. There is no
Well,
bad choice. And
it's the
I was
natural
like,
progression, right?
right. And so I was like, man, there's like some freedom that comes from that understanding and going, so if I can't really make a mistake,
Yes.
what holding me back? And when I say not make a mistake, I'm meaning like, if I crash a car, well, am I going to choose never to drive again, or am I going to choose to get behind the wheel again? And
That's a good
sometimes
analogy.
it may take a couple of days or a week, but I'm like, hey, I want to drive. I feel the urge to drive, so I got behind
Yeah.
the wheel again. But it also afforded me to understand nothing can be undone. So there is nothing
True.
you could do that can be undone. Now, with that being said, I'm not talking about, if I take a life, I can bring that life back. No. But I knew taking a life was wrong. So there was no way I was going to go take a life and then go, oh, hold on, I made a wrong
Oh,
choice.
do
Let
over.
me redo that one, bring them back. It was like, no, I knew before going into it, this is a choice that can't be undone. So it ain't worth doing.
Yeah. And, there's so many, preface this, there's so many choices that are that, I mean, and we have to live with those. When we do make a choice that turned out maybe to be not as optimal as we thought, right?
Right.
But you do get the next day as a rule because, you know, there are those choices that do have permanent repercussions. I mean, that happens a lot. But just as a general rule, when we wake up the next day, it's a new day. And if I really admire that you recognize that even though something might not have been optimal, yeah, it's a great lesson to bring forward that you can always look at it and make your new choice going forward into the next day. I think that's a
Right.
really great message that you bring forward.
And you actually hit a key word too that comes up in metaphysics is lessons, and every choice we make is a lesson. So I was taught at an early age the universe has certain lessons that you've like we call it contracted to learn.
The soul contract.
And so if when those arrive, if you don't if you make the choice that doesn't forward you the learning that you agreed to learn, it'll come up again and
And
again and
again and
again
again.
until you get it right. But even that's the beauty of the universe is they're not holding you and saying, "Hey, look, you had one shot, you missed the boat. Sorry, you're going to have to do this all over again in another life." No, it's even they have the choices are can be changed and you can make a new one. And the beauty of it as well is I was taught because people would always say to me, how do you know what choices to make? And I said, well, here was kind of a life lesson deal that I was told. So you walking down the street and a ball rolls into the street and there's a car coming and a kid comes and he gets hit by the car. And you're like, I could have stopped it. And she goes, okay, let's look at that. So now we had the scenario where the ball's rolling out, but you stopped the kid from being hit by a car, and a week later is hit by a train
Yes.
because his lesson in life was to get learned he can't just go and do whatever because there's consequences. So which was the better choice, being hit by the car or the train? And I'm like, well, never getting hit by a train is a good thing. So it would have
That's
been the car. She was like, yeah. So you have to look and feel within yourself and going, when you make a choice, you got to look at also how that choice affects someone else, and are you interfering with them?
that's a big deal.
And so, yeah, and I know that sounds like a lot of pressure to put on a kid and, to grow up with, but it actually really makes you stop and before you do things, really process and look at, why am I doing this? What am I doing it for? And I think that's what helps in the paranormal field and podcasting, because you're thinking on a different level and you're like not just going, okay, yeah, I could go to this place and have a door open and close and be like, ooh, ah, over the door opening and closing. I'm going to be looking at it and going, why is this door opening and closing? What's the spirit trying to say? Why is it this door? And an example
Yes.
I had of that was in a abandoned hospital. There was upper cabinets and there was like countertops underneath them with cabinets, and there was a broken window, and it's wintertime, so the wind's blowing. But I said to myself, I want to see a door open and close. I was like, I feel like this is the night. Sure enough, we go, and one of the cabinet doors fully opens, fully closes, fully opens, and it would just randomly do it, and it would open at different increments. Like it would open slightly, then it would open a little bit more, then it would fully open, and then it would decide to close a little bit, and it was just completely random. And in my mind, I'm going, okay, the window's broken. This is the wind. So I turn the camera towards the other cabinet that has a door open as well, slightly open. It never moves. And so I'm
Interesting.
like, I go, okay, there is no way I can explain how wind would open this one cabinet and not this one, because it's the same door on both sides that's slightly open. And then on top of that was there was a book open on the countertop, and the wind would cause the page to go slightly up, and it would curl to where you would think it's about to drop and change pages. Nope, it would fold back and then go down. And then it would pick up two, maybe three pages and do the same thing.
Right.
And I'm like, wind doesn't do this. Something's going on here. And I was like, there's definitely somebody here doing something. And I was like, man, I was like, on that night, I was like, not only did I get one of my checklists of experiences done, but I was like, I got another one too.
Yeah.
And the wild thing was a friend that I was investigating with goes, oh my God, they just called your name out. And it sounded like a computer. And I was like, what do you mean? He goes, it was that digital sounding, but it was your name. Well, we
Interesting.
hear a door slam. So we go outside, can't figure out which door it is. But in the room next to us, in a little office area, are computer books.
Okay.
And I'm like, this is just too crazy. This is just too many things I can't write off and going, this was all coincidental. I was like,
Well, did you
so
ascertain where the voice came from?
We weren't able to because it was like a one time. It
Right.
was,
Couldn't get it. Yeah.
and it's hard. And I have the sense of when I hear something, it's like you can tell when I'm investigating because I can feel it. Is when I hear something, my neck pops up and it's like I feel like my head's on a swivel now, going, okay, where's the sound coming from?
Well,
Echolocating.
yes. And isn't that funny? Because it is like an echolocation. Exactly.
Yeah.
You know, because especially if you're in a controlled environment, like there's no outside, like the structure of sound, and you've got movement happening around you, but you're like, but there's no way there should be movement. So I go into hypersensitivity mode with my hearing at that point
Yeah.
because I'm trying so hard to find it.
Yeah. And I love when people go and they start talking and you're like, I'll be like this and I'll be like picked up and I'm like, shh, shh, stop talking, stop
Yes.
talking. Because I'm like, I'm
I'm trying
trying
to
to
listen
hear.
here. Yes, I do that. We have a question in chat, and this is from Tom McNicholas, who always brings really, really good questions, by the way. But he says, do you think we bring our own energy on investigations that can make things happen? And I know my opinion. What's yours?
So my opinion is yes, but it should be no. And what I mean by that is, yes, I do know people who go out on investigations and say, if you need energy, use my energy.
I'm always
And,
like, no.
or
Yes,
my favorite is when you're with a team and they go, you can use our energy. And I will jump in right on top of that and say, no,
I do
they
that
cannot use my energy. They can use the universal energy flowing through me,
because there's plenty of it.
but not
Yes.
mine.
Yeah.
And
I don't know why people think that's a good idea. I And I'm so protective of my aura and my energy, and especially in that kind of environment. And invariably, if you're at a public location and there's, like a group of people there, you're doing like a event or something, you know, invariably there's going to be someone that says, you can use our energy. And I am quick to say, no, not mine, but thanks. You know,
I think
I,
it's because,
they see it on TV.
well, not only that, but if you're
So
brought up, and I'm not making judgments about religion or anything, so don't think that this is just my
we're not going to have people
observation.
send you nasty letters or anything.
But religion and society does not teach what energy is and
Mm-mm.
what can happen. And so, unless you've experienced it,
Yeah.
or you grow up in metaphysics where they teach you about the energies, you don't know what you're doing. And so when people say on investigation, you can use my energy, 9 times out of 10, those are the people who are going home with entities, will have attachments on them,
Yep.
will be feeling sick the next day or that night, and
The
inevitably
paranormal
will have
hangover.
something happen. And it's like, well, you asked for this because
You
you
gave
gave
me
them
permission.
your energy to connect to instead of the universal energy, which, like you were saying, is infinitely abundant, but at the same time, they can attach to it and it's not you. So you can walk
Yes.
away free and clear.
Yes. I was in a situation where there was a spirit there. It was a known spirit to the location owner. And um, that statement was made. And I was like, nope, nope. And so one of the other guests there was someone I knew and who knew me too. And they were like, well, could we like do an energy bridge? And I'm like, you're not going to like doing that with me. I mean, you really don't want to do that with me. And in fact, Lori in chat, I believe, was there the night that this happened. But this person just, we just joined hands, didn't do anything else, just an energy bridge, right? And I just kind of let it go a little bit. And the dude hit his knees. And Lori, if you're in chat still, let me know if you were there that night. But because I know you were. Um, it was so weird, right? And it was the first time there was video of it. And Lori said, yeah, it did raise the temperature. And it was so wild because this guy was like down, and the video shows that um, it was really bizarre. There was like a white aura around us. It was like doing stuff. And I don't have that video. I didn't want it because I'm just like, oh, I'm good. Thank you, though. I just wanted to see what it looked like.
Right.
And it was so intense that that man hit his knees. And I didn't even know that he went down because I didn't want to break the connection until I was ready to just kind of, okay. But that is something that people don't realize is really a thing. So when they're asking for your energy to be given, it's real. I mean, we do have our own shields, if you will, flow, whatever. And one of my best friends ever was with us, as well as this best friend. But this was my other friend's first time in a paranormal investigation, and it was like an event scenario. It was pretty interesting and cool. And when we got through, she was like, "Girl," you know. And this is somebody that I had traveled with for decades, a decade, and she was like, "Girlfriend, this is wicked." And I said, "Well, no, it's really not wicked. It's really cool." And she was like, "Well, I didn't mean bad wicked. It was just, yeah." But, where we would go was Key West every year, which has its own energy, right?
Oh yeah.
And so she was used to me in that environment. And to be at a known haunted location where you're trying to interact with a spirit just kind of blew her away. She thought that was neat. So,
And what's interesting is, as we're investigating, we have all these experiences, and a lot of times we don't even think about all the full aspect of it. And like, you experience a cold spot,
yeah,
and I was like, wow, that's so cool. You're like, the temperature dropped, that is so cool. What's going on, and then you get distracted, and you're like, oh, did you hear that noise? Oh, did you see this or that? And it's like, yeah. And so when we stop and we think about it, and I had a guest on who actually said to me, so you know what a cold spot is, right? And I was like, well, no, I don't know the exact, what could definitely be causing a cold spot. And he has meteorology as his background. And he goes, well, a cold spot forms when something sucks all the energy out of that spot. And I was like,
it's a void.
now that makes total sense. And what, and it's like, I had to go back and think about all those times when the temperature would drop,
Right.
going, okay, something sucked the energy out. But then in my mind, I go, but what happens when it gets hotter?
Yes.
What's causing? And I didn't even think to ask him that question. And I was like, that's one of the hindsight questions. You're like, as a
I
host,
know,
you're like,
right? I hate when
oh,
I get those. I'm
I
always like,
had the
why did I not
golden
ask
goose
those?
and didn't think of that question.
Yeah. Well,
But yeah, and it makes us think about, and it open, when people point these things out, you, this is what I feel like is important with podcasting, and why I hope a lot of investigators watch our shows is because they may sit there and be like, you know what? That makes total sense. And that explains why on the FLIR, there's nothing there, but this void, like you were saying, shows up, and it's all the energy. And it's amazing how they can do it to one specific spot.
yes.
Like you can be sitting there going, and it's right in front of me. But if I move like right here, but if I move my hand here, it's normal. Here is cold.
Yeah.
And it's like fascinates me how it'll be isolated to one specific area and it
Yeah.
doesn't encompass the whole area.
Well, yeah. And when I don't use a FLIR, but I have a thermal imaging camera that records and stuff too, but it's an actual real tool, like for construction and stuff. But I agree with Joshua. He says spirit is trying to manifest under either temperatures. And I do think that when they're pulling our energy, that's I get warm. And it's like Lori said in chat about that energy experiment that we did. That room got hot and or warmer. It was a basement, so it's tough to get hot. But it's I didn't get hot. I was just blowing. But I think that the gentleman that was on the receiving end of the flow, like I said, he went to his knees. It was really kind of dramatic, but I wasn't focused on him. I was, yeah, I had my eyes closed doing my thing. And so it was I was just trying to provide energy for the spirit to manifest if she could or if she wanted to. I wasn't trying to do anything dramatic or anything like that. But I think that I can't create cold. I've never been able to do that, like pull the energy out of an area.
Right.
So I've always just thought that when I hit a cold spot, it was something that um, needed energy to manifest, that it was just a void. I never thought about it being the other end of that spectrum. You know, you always had the yin and the yang.
We do. And it's interesting how it's also is we think of everything as being either three categories in the paranormal:
Mm,
the residual, where you're just watching something happen over and over;
hmm.
the intellectual, where it responds to you; and my mind is going completely blank on the third one right now.
It's
But
okay. Well,
but
because go ahead.
I've learned that we are limiting ourselves by thinking on those terms.
Hmm.
And somebody sorry, actually said to me once and said, you think you're looking at someone going through their normal day, or you're looking at a ghost because you're seeing them doing something in front of you. But what if you were in a veil
Yes.
to a parallel timeline or parallel universe, and you're seeing real time over there? They
Yeah.
don't know what's going on, so they're not going to react to you. So you won't sit there and think, oh, this is intellectual, but it's not residual either. And I was like, I've never thought about that, going, yeah, we automatically assume it's a ghost, that's attached to land or the building, and never give thoughts to all the other possibilities. And I'm like, yeah. And so I actually thanked that person, and I was like, now when I'm at locations, I really think before I say if I'm feeling something, what's going on, because I'm like in my mind going, okay, is this here? Is this there?
Yeah.
Is this alien? Is this ghost? Is this a spirit? Is this, a fae? Is this, a different creature? What are you? Let me figure that out before I know how to address you, because you're not going to go to a fae and say, "Oh, how did you die?"
Yeah. Yeah.
Because they'll be looking at you like, "What makes you think I died?
Yes.
I didn't die." And so your questioning is not going to get you anywhere. And so that's why I wonder, when we have so many places where certain people will get certain things, and but a lot of nothing, and they're like, well, there's nothing really here. Well, probably because you're addressing the wrong thing.
Exactly.
And it's like, wow, so I feel like the paranormal universe is needing to open itself up. And one of the things that I found interesting was, I'd always thought paranormal meant something to do with the spirit world,
Right.
and learned the actual definition of paranormal is anything unexplained or out of the ordinary. I was like, wait a minute. There are so many topics that I've always had interest in that are
Yes.
totally paranormal by this definition. And so I was like, I'm going to use my show and I'm going to go there, and I'm
Yes.
going to try and figure out, other people who've already figured this out. And it's like, God, I feel like I'm finally catching up to the curve.
Yes. You know, and that is a curve, because if you don't know what you're looking for, you're not going to know when you find it. And so, just, I think it took me a long time to make that connection that you were just discussing. You know, what is the paranormal? Well, it's not, woo, scary stuff. And, it's just anything that is outside of the realm of normal. And there's so many. I mean, ufology is out of the realm of normal. Cryptids are out of the realm of normal. It's not just spirits. You
No,
mentioned the Fae. There's so much. I just, I spent 3 weeks investigating in Scotland this year. There's so many things that we don't take into account, or that we don't process, you know, in the way that people who live in an ancient culture do. Yeah, there's a lot more acceptance of the Fae, the Kelpies, the I mean, for God's sakes, their national animal is a unicorn,
I
right?
know.
And let me just tell you that when I realized that, I was I was like, why is there a unicorn in every little village square that we go to? That, well, that's our national animal. Well, alrighty then. So it was Laura said I did that to her in Scotland. Yeah, I did. But you know, it's just like going to it's not a well, but it's a stream, where a stream begins, and there's cloth tied to, you know, limbs there because people believe in the healing of this. And if you take your need to that well or, you know, wellspring, then you can get assistance. You know, I mean, and this is so deeply held, and it's very much like our Native American culture that is not the mainstream type, right? Where, you know, cowboys and Indians and all this stuff. No, this is real spiritual work, real spiritual people. And to me, that's so interesting. It's a whole different side of energy work and such.
Well, and what I find interesting is like when American investigators go overseas, they take their American ways, put them there, and say, this is what's going on and what's
Unless
not
you're
going on.
investigating with the people from there, wherever there
And,
is. Yeah.
right. But when I look at them and I look at all their stuff, I'm like, well, but you guys only investigated a fraction of what was going on there.
Yes.
And they're like, well, what do you mean? I was like, well, you didn't look into this or that or any of this. And they're like, well, that's not this. I'm like,
How
no.
do you
See,
know if you don't try?
when Americans or Europeans or anywhere investigators go to another country or another region, they need to have a base understanding of their culture.
Yes.
Because, like, if I was to go to Scotland or Ireland, I have a base knowledge of they're very into the Fae.
Mm-hmm.
What is the Fae? And I'm not saying, memorize all the claims.
But you do need a working
No.
knowledge.
Right. So if like you see a little nymph like type spirit go flying by,
Yes.
you're not going to go, oh, look, there was an orb. That wasn't an orb. That was
Yes.
a being.
Yeah.
But if you don't have an understanding of those, you won't know what you're seeing. You won't know what you're dealing with. And so a lot of what's actually happening, experiencing there, will be totally missed. And
Yes.
I know, and a lot of people who have heard me talk go, well, you need to be a blank slate going on an investigation. But that doesn't mean don't know the culture. You got to know
You've got to
culture
respect.
before.
You've got to respect them. I mean, the national animal thing. I just never even thought about a national animal until I saw unicorns everywhere. I knew
Well,
about kelpies. Yeah, I
yeah,
knew about kelpies. I knew about the fae. I knew about. I did research, and I'm friends with people in Scottish Paranormal, so I made sure that I was on top of things. Tried to make sure I was on top of things before I went.
right. Like there
So
are certain places you don't step
yeah.
because that's where those creatures live.
Hmm. Yeah,
And
and
it's
you don't
like,
kick over toadstools. I mean, there's so many little things. Joshua
right,
says, or don't go. Have the respect to research before travel. Exactly. And
right. And I was watching a Hallmark movie, and the premise of the movie was they couldn't build this building because a corner was a leprechaun hive. And, we were sitting here laughing and going, oh, that's not real. And I looked it up, and that actually is a real thing where you will see odd corners in homes because the Fae have some claim to that corner, so
yes,
you cannot build on it. And so it's like so interesting to hear that and to see that and to go, Yeah, and so if you don't understand that, you may go in and be like, "Oh, well, this is just architectural, you know, just trying to make a statement." And it's like, "No,
It's
you're
really a thing.
totally missing the big picture here."
Yeah. That is something that I'm going to Ireland next year.
Lucky.
And oh, please. It is planning and saving and scrimping. and, it's all good. But it's just one of those things that I'm so interested in the the different things because I have a Native American background, right? So I if I go into the woods, I leave dimes. I leave shiny, you know, new coins or whatever. And because I just think that's respectful. Fairies like shiny things, But
Right. And you also ask permission before
yes,
entering. That's
yes.
something a lot of people don't think about.
Well, I know that I have gone into the woods before I understood this. Okay. And I had spirits that were like grumpy. I mean, they were grumpy people. And I thought, why are you being grumpy? The guy said, well, I'm dead. I was like, oh, that would make me grumpy. Yes. Okay. Sorry. But, I used to, when I very first started doing paranormal investigating, I kind of was like the bull in a china shop thing. I was just so excited to be at a location. When I do privates, residentials, I'm I'm very much even then I was very much different, But when I went to a haunted location and I only had so much time there or whatever, I was just like, oh, I've got to get this and I've got to get that and I'm going to do this. And it took me being called names and getting my feelings hurt a couple of times before I was like, why are they mad at me? Well, and you can ask Lori in chat, for me to get called the B word has in the past not been unusual. And I would get like so offended because I'm like, I'm being nice. I'm Southern. I'm really sweet. I'm just, how can you
Southern.
hear this accent and be mean to me? But it was so funny because I would just be, like I said, like a bull in a china shop. I was so anxious to get all the equipment out and so anxious to get something to answer. Show me, right?
Right.
And I lost the understanding that you you're not they're not there to show you. You're there to learn them and to be. It didn't take me long because I got my feelings hurt a couple of times, but when I learned it in my heart, and I don't do that. The whole when I was on that, Lori knows the name of the show anyway, but it was so different because when I learned that, I got very much different. Like you said, you respect that environment. You know, by the time I got to Scotland, I was like, oh, thank you, Joshua. But yes, they did. And Anthony says, have any of you ever seen an echo of an event at a place you visited? And I have.
I
So
have.
What was yours
So my echo,
other
if
than the little girl?
it's how I'm picturing it, was actually described to me as a time slip where I
Yeah.
actually went to this location, and I was in Vicksburg on the battlefield,
Okay.
and we're doing the driving tour, and all of a suddenly I'm like, I can smell gunpowder and blood in the air, and the energy is getting very thick, and I see movements around me, and I can make out like blue versus gray or whatever colors they were using at the time. And it's like I could hear what's going on. And so I was like, okay. And I would sit there and say to my parents who were in the car, going, oh, this is where a Union regiment came up and they clashed here with a few soldiers, and there were cannon actually over there, but they're not there now, so I don't know why. But
Yeah.
and I would be like describing being in the battle, and then we hit a certain spot, and I'd snap out of it, and my mom would go, "Man, the way you are describing this, I would have loved that in history class. That would have made me
Yeah.
pay so much attention." And a guest that was on my show, Dr. Heather Lee
Mm,
Landon, said to me, if all five of your senses are engaged in that
yeah.
experience, you're in that experience. And I was like, that's an interesting way to look at it. And I was like, that explains too how I was able to witness all of this, because I was thinking past life memory,
Hmm.
but I've never had a past life memory where I'm like, yeah, all five senses were engaged to this moment. And so it's only happened to me at Vicksburg and Yorktown, which
Okay.
I find interesting.
Well, I had one the very first time I went to Gettysburg, and I I had flown into Reagan and was driving from there to Gettysburg, and it was a lot shorter drive than I anticipated. I wasn't shielded. I thought I had a lot more time before I got there. And so I'm driving. And I look down and there's a house down against the forest. And there's a whole lot of people walking around. I thought they were doing like a reenactment of some type. And it blew me away because I'm like, oh, well, we have Fort Morgan down, down in South Alabama where I go a lot. And they recreate World War II stuff. But this was the first time I'd ever seen like Civil War reenactment. And nobody was doing anything acting looking, right?
Right.
And I got through and looked back and there wasn't anybody there. And I thought, oh, okay. So I must be on the battlefield, you know. And it was, and seriously, I feel like if I had been shielded, I probably wouldn't have seen it, because I do that. And, it's just, I feel like they were just getting ready to do their thing. And
And I feel like that happens at Gettysburg more than most, because historically the armies met completely by accident. They didn't even know where each other was and clashed
yeah,
in this town. And it was 3 days of fighting where they were
mm,
taking territory, releasing territory back and forth.
and going through the city, I mean, the cities in that area were completely involved. I mean, it wasn't just, I mean, the whole area was a battlefield.
Right. They talk about like Culp's Hill and the hills on the side, Round
Yeah.
Top, Little Round Top, Cemetery Ridge, but it actually, like you're saying, is, they went and were doing hand-to-hand fighting in the town.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, this is a lot of like emotions mixed into one little area that, yeah, I feel like that's why there's so many people who, whether you're into the paranormal or not, report seeing reenactors when there aren't any,
Yeah.
because I feel like all that energy of those 3 days has left such a mark.
The first time that I actively went into an investigation there, I was with a local group, and it was that same first trip. And so, we went to Sachs Bridge, and I'm just sitting there. There's several people there. Oh, thank you, Lord, portal to hell. But but I'm just sitting there, and all these local people are talking, and just shooting the breeze, catching up. And I see a stand of trees, and I was like, well, that's cool. Everything else is so flat. Okay. So I turned around and I was listening to them again. I turned back around, the trees were gone. And I was like, okay. And one of the gentlemen saw my face, I guess. He's like, what's up? I was like, well, that stand of trees is gone. There was a stand of trees right there. He's like, that wasn't trees. I was like, oh, people. Okay. Gotcha. So then we're still sitting in that area, and there were like bunnies popping up. That's what it looked like, were bunnies. And I was like, there's a lot of rabbits here, you know. And he said, oh, those are the lookouts. They're, they're seeing what we're doing, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, what? He was like, they're getting the distance to where we are, and they're spies basically, and they're coming through, and and I was like, wow, this is a lot, and then I went out there, just by myself to do photography because that's what I do. And oh, here's a good question for you. And this is from Anthony. It says, have you ever been met by spirit at the door you were visiting?
I haven't been met by a spirit, but I did have a funny experience with a spirit, and that was I was in an area where they had crematorium ovens that we had just cleaned on this location that day. And we were doing a guest investigation there where the guest investigator is going through a process and leading people. And I'm there to make sure that, nobody disturbs, and, we try to limit contamination, or if people are coming in, that they be quiet, so, not to disturb. And I see this white coat start running towards the door, and I'm like, oh my God, we're in the middle of a meditation. Do not open that door. I'm like, oh man, what is how? I'm like, I'm not even by the door, so I'm like, how do I get to the door to make sure they don't like just bolt open the door and be like, hey, I'm here. What's going on? And I'm like, oh, and so I'm frozen trying to figure this out.
You saw
And
just the
then,
white coat?
well, so it was behind chairs, and it looked like you were seeing it from windows. So it's like I would only see the upper half, and I'm thinking, okay, seeing it from windows. And then I blink and I look back, and I realize the windows are all blocked by furniture. So I couldn't see
Wow.
a spirit, or I couldn't see a person coming towards the door. So the person was inside the room. And I'm sitting there going, oh my God, I just seen a spirit in this room, and this is the first time anyone's ever investigated in here.
Oh, how cool.
And I'm like, I'm holding my tongue, and I'm like, oh my God. And so she finishes like a minute later her thing and says, now, what, do any of you feel? And I go, well, we just had a white lab coat looking person go running by, but I realized they weren't outside. They were inside the room behind this row of chairs. And she goes, why didn't you say anything? I said, I didn't want to interrupt you doing your thing. She goes, next time, interrupt me, please.
Oh,
But
that's fun.
yeah, and so that was one of the first times that I had actually physically, I would say, seen a spirit. Like they were looking like they were rushing to the door, and I was like, oh man, it was so real to me that I was like, oh my God, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? And not even thinking this person's already in the room.
Yeah, that would be different. I mean, because it's like, what are they thinking? Why are they running from us? That would, I would be concerned because I would have felt like they were trying to get away from us. And, are we making them that uncomfortable? I've, I've, I have not had spirits actively meet me at a doorway, but I have had spirits at sloths um, acknowledge me, and that's different.
Yeah.
I mean, they weren't rude or anything, but they're just kind of like, "What's up?" Yeah,
Oh,
it's like,
yeah.
no,
But
hi.
to answer your question, Anthony, on a different level, they weren't spirits, but I've had beings meet me in doorways where I would be sitting, like, I could be sitting at home when I was a teenager and growing up, and there would be shadows in the doorways. And whenever I looked over and I'm like acknowledging that I seen them, they would disappear.
Interesting.
So I thought this was a game because they're lurking around the corner, and I'm like, yes, I see you. And they disappear. So I'm like, okay, this is great fun. I didn't realize until years later when I was talking to a guest on a show and doing investigations that shadow beings are, something to be wary of. And I'm like, I kind of grew up with them.
Yep.
So, I don't know how to, take this question right now because I'm like, my whole mind is like, I've was surrounded by bad things growing up. What? And I'm
I don't
like,
think all
but
shadow creatures or shadow people, I don't think they're all bad.
well, somebody finally said to me, and they go, well, why do you think they were able to get so close to you? And I was like, they weren't close. I mean, it's the couch is in the middle of a room. They're in a doorway. It's not like they're sitting next to me. And we started laughing that they were like, no, we didn't mean that close. They mean, we're like, how could they get in your space? And I said, I feel like now, knowing what I know now, they were there to watch me and like
Hmm.
try and figure me out and be like, who are you? What do you do? How are you doing what you do and everything, and
Yeah.
more curious. And I don't think they ever meant me harm because, I mean, they had ample time to do anything that they wanted to, but I feel like they were more watching me. And what seems kind of strange is someone had said, well, maybe they were protecting you. And I was like, yeah, there are
Yeah.
talks of like there are bad spirits who will watch over to make sure an even worse spirit doesn't come in. And it's like, could that have been it? I don't know.
Yeah.
It becomes a question of, that's, I gotta look inside. But I also, though, use a technique of resonance. And what
Hmm.
I mean by that is when I'm looking at something, what does my body and energy tell me? And
Hmm.
so when I was talking about the shadow spirits growing up, I don't get a bad feeling. And so I'm like, I don't think they ever meant me harm. I think they were just watching over, maybe studying, trying
Yes.
to figure out. But I was like, yeah, like you're saying, they're not all bad, but it's just something we don't know. And so I don't want to say, oh, they were perfect angels, as the shadows, because I don't know. I don't know who they were.
Well, exactly. And what did you feel from them? I mean, did you feel that you were in danger? Did you feel that they were just being nosy? I mean, what did you feel when it was happening?
I like I said, I felt like it was a game. Like,
Hmm.
oh, he saw us. Quick, hide. It's like the ultimate game of hide and seek. Like,
They win.
who's
Yeah.
better? How close can we get before he notices us?
Yeah.
Kind of. Or you could say in like Native American terms, counting coup.
Hmm.
Like going, and they were trying to tap me to say, haha, look, I got
I
to
got
tap
it on
him.
you. Yeah. Well, I just find that interesting because there's so many ways that shadow beings are perceived. And I think that a lot of people think that they're innately bad, but I don't think so. I mean, the very first time I ever saw on film and captured a shadow entity, it we scared it because you know shined the light down the hall. It was up against a door, and the motion caught my eye, and so I asked my um, fellow investigator who was in front of me if they could shine their light back down the hall for me, and it was like pressed up against a door, and it just melted down that door, and it was at the end of a hallway where there were two other doors, and it just melted down that door and went under the door next to, and it was gone. But it acted like it was afraid of us, and I felt bad. I was like, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to scare you. But it was, you know, but I have had shadow beings that I felt like had negative intent. And I'm very quick to put up barriers with that. I try not to, I've learned to always have shields up when I initially go into a place because I don't want just anything having access.
Right.
So I try to read when I walk in and then I just kind of adjust accordingly. So,
Right. And it's funny how, as investigators, we always want certain things, but then once we get them, we kind of forget. And like I was thinking the other day, I was like, what experiences have I had and not had in the paranormal?
mhm,
And I'm sitting there, and all of a sudden I go, oh, I felt someone's hand in my pocket, like a little kid looking for candy. And I was like, totally forgot about that. And I've had my shirt plucked on my back. And I was like, oh, yeah, And so it's like I've had these experiences, but I've forgotten that I've had them. And it amazes me how often, and I don't know if it's just more me or if it's with a lot of paranormal investigators, that we're so like, okay, this experience is thought to be super rare, and this experience is
yeah,
rare, and this is uncommon. And when you have them happen, you're like in that moment going, oh my God, I can't believe I had this happen. And
yes,
then, like, a year or two later, you're like, oh, yeah, I've had that. And you're like, How could I have forgotten that?
I
Because it
know
was
it's,
such an ultra moment.
and it's almost like the on to the next mentality. It's like, okay, did that. Now, let's, you know, I don't even know how to really describe that so well, but it is kind of like, oh, okay, been there, done that. And then one of my friends, and I'm sure this happens to you too, when you're trying to write about an experience, and, it's just like, oh, wait, do I still have that evidence? you know, this is something. Let me go look at those files. And it's fun when you're like, oh, well, yeah, okay, that really happened. I agree with you when they're so cool, because you know how excited you get when they're happening, right?
Right.
You're like, all right. And then I'm with you. It's like, how can you even not just have that one marked up on the chalkboard so that you see it every so often? You're like, yeah, that happened.
I know, and
Uh,
it amazes me too when I was thinking back at, like, doing close to 40 interviews. Those hardly ever make it into the interview. When they talk about your paranormal experience, it's like, how is that not
yeah.
coming up? It's like, really,
Yes.
that seems like it should be in the forefront, not,
One of the first things you bring up.
oh,
Yeah. And this is another question from Anthony. And have you ever, I guess this has ever seen a vortex or a spirit gateway?
so that's an interesting one because the answer is yes.
Yeah.
And I actually did a video about it, and it was caught on film. Is I was at Lavaca County Jail in Texas, and I am before. Well, let me preface with I can sense portals and everything around that are natural, so I know to kind of step to the side and avoid them. And I'm walking, and I'm in these cells, and the next thing I know, I'm standing there, and I slowly start to lay my head against the bars of this open doorway between two cells, and I'm not moving. And I feel my shoulder now resting against this frame, and I'm there, and my eyes are closed. I know my eyes are closed, and I'm like, I can't hear anything going on around me. I don't, it's like all I know is I'm just feeling like it's sleep time or just
Whoa.
time to check out. And next thing I know, I get from the footage, I see the team leader taps me on the shoulder, and I literally fell to the ground and hit my head on the floor. And mind you, these are steel
Wow.
prison cells. And all of a sudden, I snapped to, and I'm like, what's going on? Why am I down here? What's going on? And I was like completely out of it. And they were like, we need to get you outside. We lost you for a bit of time. And I was like, what do you
Oh,
mean you
wow.
lost me? And I was like, they were like, we were calling you. We were trying to get your attention, and you were non responsive. And I was like, I never heard anyone call my name.
Oh, my gosh, Michael.
And so I told a friend about this in Colorado, and he goes, you were in a portal. And I said, what do you mean I was in a portal? I can sense portals. I always can tell when, there's a portal in nature. And he goes, well, those are natural. This was probably man made
Yeah.
that somebody did. and left open and you got stuck in it, and there is a way you can protect yourself from that. And I said, oh, so what is it? So he introduced us to quince seeds, which I wear around my neck all the time. And it's a little, if you can see, little seed in a resin. Or here, I can take it off
Let me
since
put my specs on and check that out. Okay, yeah.
it's called a quince seed. And their nuns in Italy put them in a resin, and they're blessed. And it's supposed to keep everything out of your field for 3 feet from you out. And so I'm like, okay, so now I feel a little bit more comfortable walking around locations because I've, had the belief that this will keep anything from getting, attached to me or getting stuck in any more portals.
Yes.
But what I took from that experience too was I created a little video on my channel. And I was like, okay, people, when you do Ouija board
Oh,
experiments or you
yeah.
do all these experiments where you're opening up space for things to come in and you don't close them, this is what can happen. And then I show the video of me collapsing to the ground,
Yeah.
coming to, and I'm like, as investigators, you need to make sure you close any space that you're opening. And if you don't realize when you're using tools that you're opening space, you might want to go back and go through Paranormal 101 and
Yes.
learn what you're doing because this is dangerous to leave open to people for someone else, because somebody else could have walked into that, or God forbid, could have been a lot worse.
Yes. And that's one of the things I don't use Ouija boards. I just don't, just because. Um, they don't scare me. I don't think that they're horrible, but I do think intent is everything. And I've had to work too many cases where people have been using them and had negative repercussions in their home from where they left it open and things were moving in and out.
Right.
But you have to, like you said, you have to educate yourself. You have to know what to do with that. And we had a case, and this was weird. Have you ever had a client that had weird EMF personally, them?
No, I can't say that I've known a person to have EMF, but I don't know. I've often wondered what would happen if I ran EMF on myself, though.
Be interesting, right? I had a client that the every time that she would walk into the home, the EMF in the home would jump to 700. And every time she would walk out, it would drop to normal. And I was actually using the TAPS app that night, just, you know. And so a friend of mine is who actually developed that app for TAPS. And I called him, and he was at an event where Jason was. And I was like, come on, Rick, what is happening here? Because I'm at a residential and this is what I'm getting. And he was like, I got nothing. I built that app. I got no idea why this is happening. And I said, well, would you ask Jason if he's ever known this to happen? Because he's got a lot more years under his belt than I do. And Jason said no, but I would definitely um, probably let that go and make sure that you're shielding yourself. But definitely, this is not something that I've ever seen happen. So it might be time
Yeah.
to go home. you know. But it was one of the weirdest things I've ever seen in my life. But this was somebody who disrespected nature. She would sit on her porch and pot shop foxes and have them taxidermied, and her house was full of taxidermy foxes and things like that. And it was just like, you know, it was just definitely a different thing. And she was She introduced herself as a graveyard stomping, Ouija board using, weird, this is just what I do. And I'm like, oh, well, okay.
That kind of explains a lot.
It did. It did. And it was so weird because I was feeling the EMF. I didn't have that app open. I didn't have a device, in use. And I whipped it out. I was like, what the heck? This is getting a little bit, you know, my hair standing up, you know. So
Yeah.
it was different. And yeah, I don't like the taxidermy either. I think it's just kind of not my color Kool-Aid. And I have live animals in my house, so I don't want anything that's not. I do have the ashes of my old, my past animals, but
Yeah, but that's different.
that is different. It's um it's a respect thing, I believe. To me it is.
It is,
And
and
she wasn't shooting for food or anything. She was shooting just to have them in her house. I thought that was a little unusual and it upset me. So
yeah, that
it upset
is
my
weird.
sensibilities.
Yeah, but what's interesting is about like how I was saying I can sense portals
Mhm.
is I went to a jail in another city that's now a museum, and they were like, "Oh, the one of the gentlemen volunteers, he had a smile on his face, and he goes, 'Oh, so you think you can tell where there's a portal?'" And I was like, "Yeah, I can usually feel the energy and feel where it's going on and what type of, what's going on with it and everything." He goes, "All right, well, follow me." And I'm like, "Okay, what's going on?" And so he
Oh,
goes, "Enter that room." So I walk in. He goes, "Do you feel anything?" I was like, "No." He goes, "Well, what if I told you there's a portal in there?" And I go, "Well, there is one." He goes, "Where?" And so I walk into the back corner, and I start putting my hand like this and going up and down the wall in this corner, and I stop right at this level, and I go, "Right here." And his eyes get a little big, and he smiles, and he goes, "You're absolutely right."
wow.
And I was like, and it was so cool to have that validation in that moment of, yeah, I can sense portals and I can, feel where they're at and interact with it without triggering it.
What does it feel like to you?
So, one way to describe it is if you've ever had like a geode of amethyst where you broke it open and you stick your hand in and it feels like way cooler, or your hand starts tingling in there. That's what a portal feels like to me. Is it's like the energy just goes off, and it's a difference of, it's not a colder, necessarily cold temperature. It's like you feel like something is reaching out to you.
Mhm.
And
Okay.
so you're like, okay, I can feel this pulling me in. And yes, the temperature is different, but it's not a cold spot. It's more like an electric cold spot where you're feeling there's like many energies going at one point.
Interesting.
Hi, Linda.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of hard to explain. That's like saying to someone, explain what it's like to stand in the middle of the ocean. I was like, I really can't. It's
Right.
you have to experience it. But yeah, I would say it's like you're feeling the heat, the cold, the electric, and the calm condensed into a ball in one spot, all moving around in like a perfect harmony. I guess would be the ultimate way to describe a portal, how it feels to me.
That sounds really cool.
Oh, they are.
I don't think I've ever I don't think I've ever located one on my own. I know that I've walked through them and knew I was there. You know, that's kind of weird. I didn't, two different ones I didn't enjoy at all. They were kind of like, I don't think this is what I want, where I want to be. But I just I find it interesting because you're only like the third person I've ever talked to who can feel them, who knows they're there. And do you know how to close them?
I do actually, and the reason is so we had an experience where we actually had a hex on us.
Oh,
And
wow.
so my parents happened to be at a lecture with the kind of, I guess you could say, the foremost expert in dowsing. And he was like in the area. So they were at his talk and he was talking with them. And somehow I wasn't there. So I don't know how the conversation went, but he came over to our house and he was standing there and he goes, well, so I can use the dowsing system to, help you guys out. Here's some questions. Let's see, what's going on. And he's doing his thing. And all of a sudden I look at him and he's got this look on his face and he's like, yeah, you guys got a hex and I can remove it. And we're like, okay, great. Remove it. And he kind of looks at me and he looks back and he does his thing. And I walked into the kitchen and he walks in behind me and he goes, you can feel this portal here, can't you? This vortex. And I said, yeah, there is an energy here. He goes, now why don't you close it? And I said, what do you mean? He goes, you know how. And I go, what? And I look at him and I go, how do you close it? He goes, well, how would you open it? And I go, well, I would do this. And I did a motion. And he goes, so if that's the motion you did to open it, how do you think you would close it? And so I was like, well, maybe. And so I do the reverse of it. And
Right?
he goes, yeah. And he goes, so you do know how to open and close portals. And I was like, I guess I do. I didn't know I did, but I guess I did.
I love
And
that.
and so it's like one of those moments, and it's like, I don't. And I'm sitting here thinking to myself, because this is before I was paranormal investigating, going, what good is it to know how to open and close portals? What is this going to help me with in life? And the
Now it's
universe,
a mad skill.
has no mistakes. And I would literally find myself start investigating and being like, okay, here's these portals.
Yeah.
Oh, and start going, should I, shouldn't I? Do I, don't I? And I would get myself into massive headaches because I'm sitting here going, okay, I should, but I shouldn't because it's not my space, but it's, could cause harm. But, and it's like my mind just is. I finally was like, all right, I got to get out of here because I'm going to drive myself nuts trying to answer this question.
Yeah. Well, it just kind of gets there. We are almost out of time, and I want you to have time to tell people where to find you. Would you like to do that?
So I can be found. I recently fixed this after someone suggested to me on Facebook under Michael Koff. So you can find me on my name, and you can find me on YouTube with Michael Koff, or you can find my paranormal podcast shows, The Energy That Surrounds Us. You can find
Yes.
Riding Through the Unknown or Paranormal Verses on YouTube. I do have Rumble channels for my interviews and things that interest me, known as Michael Koff's Adventures, or it might be Michael's Adventures. But you'll pretty much find me because you'll see my face on a video there. And I also have a Rumble channel for each of the shows. So if you like a certain show, you can watch it there. Let's see, I am on Instagram. Not as often. I use that more for promotional stuff. I'm on TikTok, and you can usually find me liking and sharing stuff and promoting stuff on there. And one thing I will say that I think kind of is the same for you, Kat, is people have asked me, why do I podcast? Am I in it for the
Yeah.
fame? And I quickly go, no, I'm
Nope.
not in it for the fame. And they go, what do you mean? I go, my purpose of my shows is for the guest to be promoted, to share themselves out.
Yes.
And if a magazine, so to speak, was to pick them up and do an article on them, I'm like, great. Would it be great if they mentioned me? Yeah. Do they have to?
Yeah.
No.
Nope.
And I'm like, I don't need that notoriety. I don't need to have my show featured in a magazine to say I've made it. I feel like I've already done that through a conversation I had with a friend and or two. And so I'm laid back and I give the space to the guest to share what they want to share.
Yes.
That's
Well,
my goal of my shows.
that's why we do this, right? Is to bring that information out. I like I like the conversation. You know, I like I like what you do, and I want people to know about you.
Well, and I
And
like what you do too. And so that's why we have such a great fit. And
yeah, we do.
the funny thing is, I'm sure people are watching this and going, well, they've met, they obviously, are great friends and hang out. And I'm like,
No,
yeah, we've
we know
met
each other.
online, but
Yeah,
we haven't met in person yet. But yeah, we're great friends and we
yeah.
help each other out and support
We
each
respect
other.
each other. A lot of respect there.
There is. And
Yeah.
I do have to say, though, Kat, I was so thrilled when you asked me to be on tonight because I'm always on your Wednesday night show. And I had two on there. And when I was like, today I was like getting all geared up and I was like, oh, I got Kat's interview coming up. It's, probably going to be on Wednesday. I'm on her paranormal show. It's so much fun. And then I saw your announcement and I was like, oh, that's right. I'm on the Fate magazine episode for the first time. I've made it to the other
Oh,
show.
come on. Well, usually because your expertise is paranormal and metaphysical and all the things that really feed into investigators. But this is such a great fit for Fate. You know, you and you should write articles and share some of these experiences, submit them to Fate. We're always looking for somebody like you that's got great experiences and wants to share them.
I
And
will.
for people listening too. I mean, if you have something,
Yeah,
fatemag.com submissions, go and check it out.
I will, because I even have a section on my website where I have all the articles that
Yeah.
I've had published online
Yeah. Grab it and
printed up
growl,
there.
dude. Grab it and growl. Go do that. I think it would be a great fit, which is
Yeah.
you're a great fit for the show. You're a great fit for really anything I do. So I would have you on anything and
Well,
have.
yeah, we have. And
Yeah,
I know if I ever needed a guest, you would pop on. And
I would.
same with you. If you ever needed a guest, I'd be popping on if I was free.
Yeah. But I do know that it's always better to schedule you ahead. But we are officially out of time. We've got to go. But thank you so much. And
Yeah.
namaste, my
Thank
friend.
you. Namaste.
All right. For everyone listening, thanks. And we will see you next week. Same cat time, same cat channel. Good night.